Alright, I actually have sound now. My mic was not working. But anyway, welcome to a new stream. I have not streamed in quite some time due to being in school. It's been pretty busy. But anyway, so I've had some people that I've seen have been asking for beginner help on these flight sim Facebook pages and whatnot, and kind of realized that I should do one. So after somebody has kind of asked for it in a somewhat way, so I will be doing a basic tutorial. Today we are in the Cessna 172 and we are at Space Coast Regional Airport, which is in Florida, in Titusville, just northwest, or really kind of just to the west of Cape Canaveral. So I actually will not be using my normal setup, which has all my buttons and switches on it in real life, and instead we'll just be using the mouse. That way you can see exactly everything I'm clicking, so you know how to do everything, so you can actually see it firsthand. So the first thing I would recommend is in your options, doesn't matter what input device you use. I just use my keyboard for this, so search for your set altimeter and put something to that. I made mine V. So you can do it by hand, but it's just a little quicker to do it that way. And I'll explain what that's for here in a minute. So anyway, so here we are in the Cessna 172. I'd go ahead and remove your yoke there just so you can see everything. You want to make sure at first that your fuel cutoff is pushed in. And you probably may have noticed that my mouse is not actually showing up, and that's due to because for some reason it does not line up with the stream and it's actually way off. I don't know why. So just look for the blue highlighted stuff. That's where I'm clicking. First thing you want to do after you make sure that fuel's in, you want to make sure your parking brake is set, which it is. Make sure your fuel mixture is pushed all the way in, and push in your throttle just a little bit, usually about an inch. I believe that's what it says in the startup procedures for this aircraft. So you want to go ahead over to the left side where your master switches are, and you want to turn both of them on, which you will notice this turns on only one of the Garmin G1000s, which is exactly what we want. It's going to take a few moments for the wings to align, but that's fine, or the alignment, which is fine. We got to do a few other things first anyway. Do not turn on your avionics switches just yet. It won't hurt you in the sim, but in real life you don't want to, because it actually can damage the avionics if you turn them on before starting the engines. So before we actually ever start an aircraft, you want to turn on your beacon and nav lights. We will turn the other ones on later, and we're working on getting ready to start the aircraft, so we'll go ahead and turn on the fuel pump. We can see our Garmin has fully loaded now, so that's good. Alright, and now let's
clear
turn
prop
the engine to start. And voila, it has started, which is good because that's what it was supposed to do. Now that we've got that started, I'm just going to let it sit here and idle just for a minute, and now we can turn on our other avionics. And we'll press the enter key there and get it turned on. So as of right now, I do not have any type of flight plan loaded. However, you can load it via the map screen before you hit fly, but if you want to do it like you would in real life, at least pretty close to it, you will follow these steps. So in the bottom right hand side of your Garmin, you see the button FPL, which stands for flight plan. Imagine that. Anyway, with the origin, you will just use the big fat knob there and one click to the right. The origin is the place you're taking off from. So we'll just start scrolling on the little knob here, and you will have to look up your code at whatever airport you're at, which you can see from the flight screen, or you can Google it as well. But for Space Coast Regional, it is KTIX, or KTIX. So we're going to load that in here. Just going to scroll. Oop, passed it. Nope, maybe I didn't. I thought I did. Where we go? Almost there. There we go. After you get it set there, you will make sure that the waypoint information is correct, which it is. It says Titusville there. You will hit the enter key, and for the runway, let's open up our ATC panel here and let's tune the ATIS. It says wind is 040 at 7, so that means it's coming from the northwest at 7 miles per hour, or 7 knots. You can also see right here in this, it says altimeter is 29.92, which is actually standard, and that's because I've selected the weather to be a certain way for this. Anyway, you will see right about in the middle of the screen there, it says 29.92. If you ever need to change it, you will just simply change it with your big knob, which I can't do right now because I've got this open. But you would just change it to whatever that is set, and that goes off barometric pressure. If you do not have that set right, you will not be at the right altitude. I'm not going to get into too much of the details as to why that is. Anyway, so we know we're going to be taking off to the north, because you always want to take off in the direction of the wind, at least as much as you can. And let's see, I did not put the runway in, so let me see if I can go back to that. I don't know if I can or not without having to restart it, but it's okay though. I'm not going to do an en route, but I will put the destination, which our destination will be, and we'll probably fly to Melbourne, and that is KMLB for their code. So this is entered exactly like your place of origin. Oops. There we go. Now B. And that says Melbourne, Florida, which is where we want to go. So we'll hit enter. And I'm not worried about a runway because I do not know what the weather is there right now. As you can see, our compass here on our MFC is the color magenta, or purple. It's technically magenta. It says GPS. That is good. If it ever is green or says anything other than GPS, you just hit this little soft key here under the CDI until you get to GPS. Most of the time this is how it will load in with the localizer 1, and you usually only have to hit it twice to get the GPS. If you do not do that, it will not follow your flight plan whatsoever. So now that we got that set, we know our barometric pressure is 29.92. We'll get our yoke put back in here, and we're pretty much ready to take off for the most part, at least start taxiing to go to the takeoff position. So this is, Space Coast Regional is a controlled airport, which means there is air traffic control there. However, I do not think it is always controlled. I do think at some points, maybe the weekends or after a certain time in the day, it does go uncontrolled, which means there is no air traffic controller there, and you will be following your traffic patterns that are designated to that particular airport for when it comes to landing and doing takeoffs. So for the sake of the air traffic control being horrible right now in Microsoft Flight, we are just going to pretend it is a uncontrolled airport by doing our normal announcements like we would in real life. You can get rid of the flight plan there or hide it by hitting FPL again. So we're pretty much ready to taxi. You would announce yourself as your name of your aircraft, or your tail number, which can be seen there. Mine is November 750 Tango Tango. If you do not know your phonetic alphabet, I highly recommend you learn it. Make sure you learn the correct one. So, alright, normally here we would say we'd key up on the correct channel or frequency and state November 750 Tango Tango at wherever you're parked at. So we're at general aviation ramp here, and you will say what you will be doing, which is your intention. So we'll be saying we are taxiing to runway 09 via taxiway Bravo for a south departure. So in other words, you're telling everybody you're at the parking ramp and you're going to be on taxiway B headed to runway 09, and in what direction you intend on going after you take off. So that's what we're about to do. Now that we're getting ready to roll, we're going to turn on our taxi lights, our strobe lights, and we'll go ahead and turn on the pilot heat as well, which the pilot heat keeps the carburetor from freezing over and icing over during flight and or taxiing. Even though it may be awesomely warm down here in Florida right now, believe it or not, your carburetor can still freeze over. It can be 100 degrees outside and your carburetor can still freeze over. So always remember your pilot heat. We're going to release the park and brake, which you may or may not have key mapped. If not, it's this stick right there. You just simply click it. And we're now ready to taxi. So we're just going to give it a little throttle here till we get going. Sometimes it takes a little extra throttle in the beginning to get it rolling, and you can kind of dial it back after you get moving. And we're just going to use the rudder sticks here to taxi. And we're going to do exactly what we stated in our announcement. And when taxiing, you don't really ever want to go over 20 knots. So when you're taxiing, to know how fast you're exactly going, do not pay attention to your airspeed indicator here on the left, because that measures only airspeed, not true speed. Over here on the other Garmin, you can see in the top, kind of in the middle, it says GS, that stands for ground speed, and it has a 6 beside it, which is 6 knots. So that's good. We're definitely going under our limit, so we can increase it a little. You only want to turn at around 10 knots. So when we get to our turn here, we're going to make sure we're below 10 knots for ground speed. And you do want to stay on the center line like I just was not for a moment. It's a little windy, not too much wind, but you almost always have to apply a little bit of left rudder, and that is to compensate for what's known as the P factor in prop planes only. That does not count for jet planes, and that is because of the motion of the propeller is actually kind of torquing on the plane a little bit, and that's what causes it to want to go to the right. So as you're taxiing, you want to make sure all your gauges and stuff looks good, and that would be, well, in the Garmin you don't really have a whole lot of it, but in the top of your main flight display here, you can see that upside down smiley face, it looks like, with the triangles and a little sliver at it. Kind of want to make sure they're all moving. You want to make sure your compass moves as you do. That's just to make sure everything's working pretty well. And we're coming up on what's called the hold short line, which is right up here. All taxiways that lead or are about to intersect with a runway will have this. Never ever cross that without permission from air traffic control or stating that you are crossing it, which would be at uncontrolled airports only. So here we are holding short. We're going to put on our parking brakes here real quick, and you do what's called a run up, where you increase your throttle to a good bit. You just want to make sure it sounds good, engine's running good. You want to make sure your RPMs are moving up, which is seen on the right hand Garmin. In the top left there, I can see it is. I can see the fuel flow is moving, oil pressure went up a little bit, oil temp went up a little bit, and that's what we want to make sure it's working. So now that we've done our little run up here, we're going to turn off our taxi lights and turn on the landing lights. And we're going to look at our windows here and make sure there's no incoming aircraft in any direction. Always look both ways, even though you know or may know which way you're supposed to take off. It's never a bad habit to check everywhere. So now that we've done that, we can release the parking brakes, and we're going to make an announcement that would be in this fashion. Space Coast Regional Airport, November 750 Tango Tango. Depart runway 09 for south departure, Space Coast Regional. Kind of want to try to get the habit of announcing the name of the airport at the beginning and the end. And that's just in case the pilot may have not caught what airport it was in the beginning. That could be in the vicinity on Unicom, which is 122.8, I believe. And that gives them a second chance to hear what airport you were referring to. Well, we're nicely taxiing out on the runway here. We're going to go ahead and get our flaps set, which is going to be one notch down, which is located in the bottom hand right corner here. Just below the yoke, you'll see that white bar. That is it. Or you can just simply map it to a button, which is obviously way more simple. And we're lined up here pretty good, and we're going to start giving it a little throttle, nice and easy. We want to make sure our air speed indicator does increase as we go down the runway. Make sure you're compensating for right rudder. Also, if you have a pretty good wind, you want to make sure you keep your yoke pointing in the opposite direction of the wind. That helps keep the plane level after you take off. It's a bit windy here today. Oh yeah. Alright, so there we go. We have touched down. We want to stay on runway heading until we have cleared the runway. Speed looks good, temperatures look good, RPMs look good. So we're going to go ahead and raise our flaps, and you will have a nose pitch on this. It'll want to pitch down, so you want to do your trim. Set your trim to help you counteract that. And in this aircraft, maneuvering speed is 105 knots, and that's indicated airspeed, not true airspeed or ground speed. So we're about to make our turn, so we'll make sure we're under the 105 knots, which we are. It is quite a bit windy here. This is going to be a good time to point out that Melbourne, our destination airport, is to the southeast, which is in between the headings of 0 to 179. So that means you're going to have to be at an odd 500 foot, which means you would have to be at either 3,500 or 5,500, 7,500 feet in elevation. If you are anywhere in the 180 to 359 you would be at an even 500 feet, which would be 4,500 or 6,500 and so on and whatnot. It actually doesn't matter what level you fly at if you're under 3,500 feet 3,500 feet above sea level. So 3,500 is where it starts, with depending on your altitude and direction. If you're flying IFR, you will be assigned one by air traffic control, but those will be at even, well, not necessarily even, but it'll be at just thousands of feet, not the 500. So, we are climbing up. It's quite windy here. Goodness gracious. Alright, so notice on your compass down below, it's got like 3 bars. It's got one at the top with the arrow, then it's got one way off to the right, and then one at the bottom. So that basically is your direction you need to travel, but you want to kind of line all the sticks up. So the one off to the far right means our flight path is to our right. So you want to kind of split the difference between the one with the arrow and the one with that's way out to the side with your heading of travel. Slowly, as you get closer to this flight path, that one that's way off to the side will start to close in, which is basically shows you your distance away from where it's at. So once it starts getting in pretty good close, we're going to start turning left towards the direction we need to travel, and we'll keep it all lined up nice and neat. And just whipping the plane around. Go up very high. I'm just going to let's see, I'm going to use autopilot here, so we will go to 3,500. And we're about 13 minutes out from the airport. I'm actually only going to go to 2,500 feet. So to do that, you will need to use your altitude thing down here, your knob. Either one works, and you'll just simply put it to wherever you want, which you can see in the middle there. I put mine at 2,500. After you get that set, you can turn on the autopilot by hitting the AP button. Either one works. Now notice it says roll, AP, and PIT. So what we want is for it to say GPS for the first one. So turn your head into that direction that I was telling us we need to fly, and turn on your heading button. You can see it now says heading, and then you want to click nav, and now you'll notice it says GPS out to the right. That's because it actually hadn't picked up your flight path yet, which you can see the bar is moving in, so we're getting closer. Once it gets right on top of it just about, it will switch to GPS, and then it will follow the flight plan that we've built. So now we're going to focus on our vertical speed, so click on vertical speed, and then you want to increase or decrease your nose up or nose down. So ours is going to be, well, it's actually already at 2,500, so should hold there. Alright, we're going to get rid of this one. Nice and simple flight. Butter smooth, butter smooth. I'm trying to do a maneuver here, so let's pull back on the throttle. Alright, and you can see it now says GPS, and it's taken over the actual flying for us pretty much. it's going to hold itself at 2,500 feet in the correct heading that we wish to have. So now that we are in pretty much cruise, we can increase our throttle to whatever we wish. And now also that we're at cruise, you actually can turn off your pilot heat and your fuel pump. Here is where you would normally trim out your airplane with the fuel, but I'm not going to get into that too much since this is not real and you're not trying to make everything perfect. That'll be for a later one, a little more in-depth tutorial. One big thing to note when you're flying VFR, it stands for visual flight rules, and it's basically what it states. You're flying just by visuals. You're not going to be doing that type of IFR flying with approaches and all that that's programmed in that like your airliners use, and you can use it in a Cessna like this after you get that experience and get that certification. But the thing to remember when flying VFR is your clouds. So today is a beautiful day to fly because there's no clouds, but if there is, and this changes with different types of airspaces. Could not think of the word, sorry about that. So every airspace is a little different for the most part. You can download a little cheat sheet from online if you just type in VFR cloud rules, but for the most part it's staying 2,000 feet away from them on the horizontal and 500 foot above the clouds and 1,000 foot below. So you're basically just dodging them. Another thing that's good to do, which usually is done in the beginning, is turn on your XPDR thing, and you want to turn it to altimeter or altitude reporting and make sure it's at 1200. That is for VFR flying. You'll only use a different number if you're actually in IFR or getting flight following by air traffic control. That's just for them to keep track of you and can see you on radar and all that good stuff. As you're flying, you always want to keep an eye on everything. RPMs look good, fuel flow, pressures, vacuum, all that looks good, which of course is going to be fine in the simulator unless you have failures turned on to some extent or have one of the mods. So therefore theoretically nothing is going to go wrong in this flight. Now for a little information regarding your airspeed. So if you look at your bar here, mine's at 111 right now, which is indicated or true airspeed. You want to stay in the green if you're just doing basic cruise. The yellow means you can do that fast in this particular plane or whatever particular plane you're in, but the yellow is only for if it's absolutely calm winds. There can't be really any type of winds for you to go in that. If you do, you would actually possibly stress the airframe of the aircraft and could tear apart, sink the brake. The white, which you can just barely see a little bit of, but it has a little white bar at the bottom, and with the green, which you'll see more of that if I slow it down. That is your do not ever go that low of airspeed without flaps. Actually, I take that back. I'll show you where it shows you to never go below with flaps when we get lower airspeed. That is just the point at which you can actually deploy your first flap setting. So don't ever use flaps if you're above that white bar, because that would put too much stress on the airframe of the craft. I'm just going to let the autopilot continue to take care of me. In the real world, about every 15 minutes you would want to adjust your barometric pressure setting to make sure you're continuously staying at the correct altitude. This would be done by looking at what's called MTARs of airports, or getting in contact with air traffic controller. They can all do that. Let me show you a little something here. You open up your VFR map. Which this has kind of recently been added, and I like it. You can click on the airport and it'll tell you quite a bit about it. Tells you your runway lengths, and what type of runway they are, which is really good. It has all your frequencies in there. And at the bottom is your MTAR, which first bit of it is the airport name. Then the next bit is the time. And then the next one is your wind, which it says, you see the 10012G19. It stands for, the wind is from 100 degrees, which is almost east, slightly southeast. At the 12 means at 12 knots with gust up to 19 knots. The S for the 10 SN is for visibility, which that stands for 10 statute miles. That's max, and you won't ever see it more than that. You will, however, of course, see it lower. And the rest is talking about where clouds are, stuff like that. I do not have clouds turned on for the sake of just for a simple tutorial. Normally Melbourne is a controlled airport. I think at all times. I could be wrong though. But we would want to be in contact with air traffic control there before we entered their airspace. Which your airspace, you can see it on this map. It's that white dot, or blue dotted line, excuse me, all around it. So I'm technically in its airspace right now, probably. That does not actually give you a good description, really, of where you're at, because there's actually different levels, flight levels. It kind of looks like an upside down wedding cake. As you get closer, the airspace gets lower, so pretty far out. I actually might be flying under that airspace right now, but by the time I'm almost at the airport, I will be well within it. So one thing you just have to look at on a true VFR map, and you'll have to learn how to read them, which sometime I might do a tutorial on that, a little quick teaching lesson per se, if anybody wants it. Anyway, so we're pretty close. We're a little over 2 nautical miles away, and we had just read that the winds were from the 100, which is to our left. And even though I did turn off the winds, we're going to treat it as if they're actually here. So I'm going to turn it back on to heading mode. I want to go to the right. You also want to know the altitude of the airport, which I know this one is 16, 20 foot, something like that. Yeah, it's 27 foot in altitude. So you always round up that number. So in this case it would be 100. And the reason for that is to get in the traffic pattern, you want to be at 15. I'm actually not sure. I can't remember if it's 1,000 or 1,500 foot above it. Pretty sure it's 1,000 foot. So you add 1,000 to 100 and you magically get 1,100. It's amazing how math works. So that's what we would do. I'm also going to point out something else as we let the autopilot take control of this. Now that we are actually descending, we want to turn back on the fuel pump and pilot heat as well, because we are going to be using reduced throttle, which is the biggest time when icing would occur. We're going to descend at 600 feet per minute, which is perfectly fine for this. But I'm going to point out how we are going to do this. So MOB is back to the left. So to enter a traffic pattern, most of them are left-hand traffic pattern. Some of them can be right-hand. You figure that out by looking at what's called the plate for the airport. MOB is left-handed, so I'm going to have to enter it at 1,500 foot above. That's where the 1,500 foot is. So this time it would be 1,600, so we need to go to 1,600 feet. I'm going to start making my turn back around. And we're going to do what's called a midfield entry, which means we're going to fly directly over the airfield at 1,600 foot above it. Once I get turned around here, I'm actually going to manually take over. Alright, I'm going to turn off autopilot here. I'm going to stay around 1,600 foot, and I'm going to make sure I go directly over the field. And there's two ways to do this entry. One, it's either to fall right in line with the traffic pattern, or go a couple miles out and do a U-turn and then enter it on what's called the downwind. The downwind is basically when you're flying parallel to the runway, opposite of the direction you're actually going to land. So as you can see here, we are going directly over the runway. Also keep in mind here, I've never actually flown an airplane, so I've never had exact training on all this, so I could be doing minor mistakes here and there. But for the most part, this is fairly accurate. Usually the traffic patterns are about a mile out. If you just look up traffic patterns on YouTube or Google, you can kind of see what I'm talking about with how traffic patterns work. It's just basically a circle, or a oblong circle over the field. So I'm going to do a left-handed entry into the field, which I'm not going to do it yet. Wait till I'm about a mile or so out. And I'm probably going to be about a mile or fairly close to it, so I'm going to start doing my left bank to enter what's called the downwind. And you always want to keep an eye on where your airport's at, because you want to be directly parallel to it. Alright, I'm pretty parallel to it. So now I'm going to stay straight. And I want to wait for what's called my base leg, which is basically where I'm going to turn left perpendicular to the runway. Remember, while you're doing this, you want to maintain your 1,500 foot above. I'm also going to go ahead and put on my first stages of flap. So to do that, I need to make sure I am in the white, so I need to slow up a little. And when you do deploy your flaps, you will feel it kind of kick the airplane up, and it will slow it down as well, because you're creating drag you're also creating more lift at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first flaps down just 1 notch, and you can see my airspeed slow down, so you can let it slow down to about 70 is fine right now. And you may need to adjust your trim for this, and that's just to help you not have to have pressure on your yoke or joystick, whichever it is you fly. That way it'll stay pretty level. I'm actually losing a little bit of altitude here, which I don't want, and I'm pretty good ways out now, so I'm going to turn left, and while I'm doing it I'm going to go ahead and start decreasing altitude to around 1100 foot, nice and slowly. Try not to ever get in the habit of doing flaps while you're making a turn, because that can induce stalls, wing stalls, so try to never do that, and also make sure you don't go above your white bar there. And now I'm pretty much perpendicular to the runway, and I want to make my left turn when I know I will line up nice and smoothly to it. I'm almost at 1100 feet, which is excellent. I'm going to slow up a little more, and I'm going to start making the left hand turn here, banking left, making sure I do it nice and smooth. Decrease my throttle a little more, and slowly, which I undershot it, and slowly start decreasing my altitude as well. This was not the best base leg, by no means. It should look more like a square. And now that I'm getting ready to be on final, as soon as I line up perfectly, I'm going to do my next stage of flaps. And you will feel that kick again, and decreasing airspeed. We want to make sure we stay about 65 right now. I'm also low. You may have noticed at some point those white lights that you see, or red lights you see at the beginning of a runway. They're usually out to the left or right, which mine are all red right now. That means I'm too low. If they're all white, it means you're too high. You want it to be too white and too red, which means you're perfect. And sorry about that, I totally just knocked my mic off. Alright. So here we go. Get back in line here, because I knocked my mic off and that kind of threw my focus off for a minute. So we got 1 white. Go ahead and do the last stages of flaps. And now we're at 2 white, perfect. Now I'm going to nose down, and I'm going to try to just do it nice and slow here to where they stay those colors, which means I'm perfect on the glide slope. A little high now. I'm going to decrease it. And since I'm nosing down a little more, I need to lower my airspeed. Still a little high. So the 2 big white blocks are you see on the runway is basically your aiming point. That's what you want to hit. Well, that's where you want to aim for. Once I get to the runway, I'm just going to kind of hover above it just a few feet, decrease my throttle, and kind of let it just gently sit down. We want to kind of put it on the back tires first and then the front tire. We don't really want to do a 3-point landing. That can be rough on an airframe. That was a little high, but that's okay. So I'm just going to reduce my throttle a little bit. Just let it sit there and hover. Almost going to kind of stall it out in a way. So nice and easy. Just like that. The back 2 and then the front one. And you're just going to sit here, throttle all the way back, stand on the center line. Don't really want to use any brakes right now. You want to use as much of the runway as you want to, or as you can, to slow down. Using brakes in real life can get them pretty hot and wears them out. They don't have much of a shelf life per se. I'm pretty slow now, so we'll do my exit from the runway. And now you'll notice there's a hold short line here. Whenever you're leaving a runway, you do not have to hold short of them. You are absolutely able to go ahead and cross them, no questions asked, unless for some reason the air traffic controller tells you to. And as you're doing that, you want to get over, and after you get your tail clear of it, you can go ahead and go to a stop. And you want to do what's called cleaning up the plane, which basically means just put your flaps back up. You also want to go ahead and turn on your taxi light, and you can turn off your landing light. And now you're free to go ahead and taxi to parking. And I never did really make a particular spot for us to land or park it, so I'm just going to say this is where we were going to park it. Which is, I don't think, an actual parking space. So we're going to stop the plane. We're going to put our parking brakes on. We're going to turn off our taxi light, turn off our strobe light, turn off the fuel pump, the pilot heat, turn off the magnetos, turn off the avionics switches, and then turn off the rest of our lights, turn off our master battery, and then click the fuel cutoff. And that's it. The plane is parked. In real life, you would then go ahead and put the chocks on and your covers and whatnot. So hopefully this was kind of useful. I will do some more of these tutorials with other types of aircraft, and we'll get into more advanced ones. Some maybe using IFR and whatnot. If you have any special requests or have any ideas, anything like that, just let me know and I'll make it happen. Thank you for joining today, and hope you find this helpful, and see you next time.